May 21st, 1983. This is Joe Todd, an interview with two sisters, Ella Mae Prophet and Ann E. Langley. Correct. Mrs. Prophet, you're the oldest. When were you born?
August 25th, 1900.
Mrs. Langley, where and when were you born?
November the 2nd, 1902.
Where were y'all born?
Near Westville, I was born. And
I was born in Christie.
I wrote a thing here, wrote my history.
Still Cherokee Nation.
And you were born near Westville? Who was your father?
James L. Christie.
James L. Christie. Who was your mother?
Lula C. Christie.
What was her name before she was married?
Still.
S-T...
I-L-L.
What kind of work did your father do?
Farm.
Was he an original allottee?
Yes.
And where was his allotment?
Well, part of it was up here around Westville, about 3 miles. And, of course, they had some scattered in other counties. You know, they call surplus land. They had some in, I don't know if it's Nowater County or somewhere they had some land.
Now, are both of you also allottees?
Yes.
Did you both have allotments?
Yes.
Well, now really, I was what they called a too late Indian, but they reopened the rolls, and I got money, and my father took the money and bought some land off of my grandmother, his mother, where I live now at Christie.
Okay. How did they determine what land you were going to get in the allotment process? How'd that work?
Well, I don't really know, but I know they had to go.
They filed on it.
What?
Papa filed on.
Yes, but they picked out what they wanted. Some people were already living in certain places, and they filed on the land that they were living on, had their improvements already, and then the others just showed what they could that hadn't been already allotted. And so then after they used all the land in this part of the country, some of them had to take the extra that they didn't get in other counties, because I had 10 acres in Creighton County, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And so they made that up.
Yeah. And Mrs. Langley, you said that you were a too late Indian?
Yes, that's they closed the rolls, Indian rolls, Dawes Commission rolls, and they reopened in what year? And then my father put me on the roll then, and I got money because all the land had been given out, and he took the money and bought from my grandmother, his mother, that joined where I live now.
Okay. How big was your father's farm?
160 acres. Huh? Out here.
Well, altogether, Mama had some, and he did, and I had some. Lucy had some. There were four of the family had joined, and so I myself know how much there was.
Yeah. Now, was your mother also an allottee?
Yes.
Elmay, there was 160 acres apiece.
Well, I don't know.
All of
That
it.
is according to the value of the land.
640 acres.
I think it was according to the value of the land, because the hill land was called 50-cent land, so 50 cents an acre it was rated, and better land was, they didn't get as much in proportion as according to the value of the land, I think. I don't know just exactly.
Who determined the value of the land? Who?
Well, the Cherokee Nation, I guess it was. The Cherokee government, see, they still had Cherokee government. At Taupo was their headquarters. Because that's where their records were, and that's where they had to go to file on the land. And they had to go out and look for their surplus land when they still didn't have enough, because Papa, I remember, went on the train and went to Muskogee and went out from somewhere else. And Muskogee was really the headquarters. Of course, it went to Chillicothe, you see.
Do you remember the Dawes Commission coming through?
No, I don't. And that was, I don't know what year it was. I was born in 1900.
1905, 1906.
Well, I was too young. I just remember them talking about it, but I don't remember it.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
Barely. See, we were too small. We didn't pay any attention to what was going on.
What kind of chores did you all do on the farm as children?
Oh, carrying wood and
Helped in the garden,
yeah.
and when we got old enough, we helped milk the cows. We
Yeah.
usually had 2 or 3
feed the
cows.
chickens. That was my job.
What was your favorite chore? What'd you like to do best?
I guess feed the chickens.
It's yours.
What'd you
That
do?
was my job.
Don't know if I had a favorite. I just did what I had to do.
What about laundry? Who did laundry?
Well, we had an older sister, and she was 4 years older than I, and she helped with that until we were closer together, and we helped as we got older. But Mama did the laundry.
How'd you do it?
Out in the yard, washed on the rubber and boiled the clothes in a black pot, kettle, and chunk them.
Chunk 'em.
Chunk them with a stick,
Oh.
make them go into the soap and water. That's the way people washed.
What kind of soap did you use?
Homemade soap.
She made her own soap?
Uh-huh.
How'd she make it?
With ashes, lye, and meat scraps that they saved throughout the months, and then they saved that. Then they run the ashes through a hopper, the water through the ashes in a hopper. And we helped them when they cleaned the stoves off our places. They put them in this, and then in the spring, they'd pour water, make a little dent in the top of the ashes, and the water would drain down through and had a little funnel shape down to the bottom, run out, and that was the lye. And that's
How
what
tall
those-
was that hopper? How big
Oh,
was
it was 5 or 6 feet high, how high as they could get their ashes
Yeah,
in.
was it,
Yeah, it was so big. It's
what, about
good
3
size.
feet, 3 feet square or something?
Yes.
What kind of wood made the best ashes to make lye?
Oak,
Oak.
hardwood.
How big was the house on the farm?
Our home,
Had upstairs too.
well, up here we had,
Fireplace and the front room, what you called it, living room.
5 rooms. We had 2 upstairs.
Did you all sleep upstairs or downstairs?
No,
Down.
we slept downstairs.
How many rooms in the house?
There were 5 there.
5 rooms?
And in later years, they moved to Christie down by our grandfather, and they built a new house down there, and it had 5 rooms at Christie.
Yeah. Who was your grandfather?
John Christie.
John Christie?
He was a white man, a Texan, and he married our grandmother. She was a full-blood Cherokee. And
Where'd they meet?
they lived at Christie.
I mean, where did they meet?
They met in Texas. She was a Star, and her father was James Starr, the father of Tom Starr. You read about Tom Starr, an outlaw. And so James Starr had something to do with signing the treaty before they were removed here.
From Georgia.
And so he was one, and they killed him. He lived out east of Stillwell, out towards Evansville, Arkansas. And our grandmother was just a little girl at that time. And
What was her name?
Jane.
Jane Starr?
Uh-huh. And so they had killed nearly all that I don't even know what side he was on now, but they had killed most of them. And when this time, she was on the porch early in the morning, pouring water for her dad to wash his face for breakfast. And a bunch of men, seems like there were 9 of them, rode up and didn't say anything. They just rode up and shot him down there. And so she was, I think, about 9 years old. And so then, and they shot one of the boys and his nephew. Went to his sister's house and shot a nephew. There were several killed in the, I don't remember just how many and what. But anyway, so then after that, her uncles took her and went to Texas. It might have been during the time just before the Civil War, because, you know, a lot of people went to Texas before then. So they took her to Texas, her star uncles, and she grew up then from that age up until she married, and she met Grandpa Christie down there and married him. And he was his father was a slaveholder. They had thousands of acres of land, and they had slaves all over. We have a copy of his will where he willed so many slaves to this one and that one, but they were white people, see. So then, after Grandpa was in the war, he wasn't really in the Civil War, but it was during that time, somehow, yes, he was in the Civil War, but he got a little pension off of the Indian Wars, you remember, they had on the border. But anyway, after the war was over, they moved back to Indian Territory and settled here. And so I was looking at that record where they said that, what was the ones that refused, but they were married in Texas. And then when they were going to allot land here, well, they said if a white man was married to an Indian, they could get an allotment if they were married by Cherokee laws. So they went and got married by Cherokee laws, and so he got an allotment with the Cherokees.
Oh, okay.
And that's where they lived at Christie, on his part of the
Smart
allotment.
white man.
Mm-hmm. Certainly was.
So
Was the town of Christie named after him?
Yes.
he gave land for the, or leased, I guess, I don't know how, to the railroad when the Frisco Railroad came through from Muskogee to Fayetteville. He let them have the land, and his home was just, it came out through his place, you see, just a quarter of a mile from the house.
Did your grandmother, Jane Starr, did she come in the Trail of Tears?
No.
No.
Was it her mother then that came on the trail?
It was on our other grandparents' side, Sally Walker.
Well, James Starr came, but they didn't come over the driven Trail of Tears, because he had been one of the sons of this tree, and they came by boat and down the rivers, and I don't know. She was born after I believe she was a little girl. She was born in 1836, and I think that this drive was in 1838 or 9, you know. But, and I don't know if they came ahead of that or what, but they settled just over in Indian Territory from the Arkansas line. So she grew up here from a child, and there was her father had 2 or 3 wives, and he had a lot of children. There's a whole group of them. She used to laugh and talk about how many brothers and sisters she had, you know. And some of them.
Did you ever hear any stories about the trip to Indian Territory?
Yes, our mother's family came over the Trail of Tears.
What did they say about it, about the trail?
Well, her grandmother, or was it great-grandmother, was, she always,
If you can read that, I wrote it with a pencil.
she said that she walked nearly all the way, didn't carry her baby on her back. They'd get to ride so far. And she said some days it'd rain all the way, you know. She said their skirts would freeze after they were wet, and just like boards flapping against their bodies. And then said at night when they'd drive them into a big building of some kind, wherever they'd meet and make coffins to bury the dead along the way. And sometimes they didn't even make coffins, they said. They just put them in the ground and bury them. But she said she expected to bury her baby every day, but she made it here with her, and she grew up here after she got here. And I don't know about her husband. He must have been dead before she came. But that was her story, and she lived for quite a long while, till after the war was over here. And they settled up close to Baptist Mission, and that was our mother's family.
Now this is what your mother told you?
Yeah. If you can read that.
You want to read it to me?
Pardon?
You want to read it to me?
Read it to him.
No. You want me to read? The trail of they traveled was rough from Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. My great-great-grandmother, whose English name was Sally Walker, was one of the many who walked with only moccasins on her feet, and when they wore off of her feet, they traveled barefoot in snow, rain, and sleet, and until their feet froze and bursted and bled. She said they had an ox wagon to haul the government supplies and to haul the old when they were too sick to travel. Just about every night they buried someone, she said. If they died during the day, they would not stop to bury them, but haul them in the wagon till night, and by campfire they would dig a shallow grave and roll their bodies into it. By daylight they were up and on the road after eating a meager meal. They took their axes and blazed a trail for them to travel uphill and down. And across the Mississippi River they built rafts and overloaded them and sank a great many in the river. Some thought it was on purpose because they said their government food was running short. Now that's what they said, really. When they got near the promised land, she said she thought perhaps in Arkansas somewhere there was a mill or some sort with a long shed, and the government men who was driving them, of course the men were horseback, let them stop in the shed to thaw out because it had been raining all day, and it being winter, their dresses were frozen and hit their legs like boards. That's what she just told you. When they traveled on to their new homes, they turned them loose and told them, "This land is yours as long as water runs and grass grows." That's it.
Sound like rough times.
Yeah.
How come they moved in wintertime?
Well, the government wouldn't let them. Andrew Jackson was the president. You know, she's a woman that won't have a $20 bill because Andrew Jackson's picture's on it. If she gets one, she'll go change it for 2 10s.
That's what my husband used to tell about me.
But I never have understood how come they made them move in the wintertime.
Well,
Well-
they're trying to make a settlement with them and trying to get them to move for years, back and forth, and they just finally the government just wouldn't wait any longer. They refused.
Discovered gold on the land, and they wanted the Indians off.
And they said
Actually.
some of the men when they hurried them all together that morning they had to leave, and got them all together and said some of the homes they had nice homes and property, cattle and stuff, and said that they set the houses afire, some of them the white people moved into them before they could get out of there. Just took possession of what they had and said the men would go in and take their gun off the rack, and that's all they'd take with them, because they didn't have time to have and didn't have enough wagons or any way to haul anything. So what few wagons, some of them hauled few things, but many of them didn't. All they did, the men took their guns, and then the government furnished some axes and a few tools when they got here to work with.
Now, how were the Indians rounded up? Or how was that handled? And then,
Well, they went into the hills, and some of them got away and lived in caves.
Well, they just went in and told them they had to be there at a certain time. See, they had kept getting more cruel all the time,
I have writing down past.
and
I should have brought it.
had many of them were killed, and so then they knew they couldn't go any further. They couldn't resist any longer, and they had to listen. So, in order to stay alive,
Government.
So that's why they told them they had a place where they
Corral
them
them.
up. Yeah, I guess you'd call it a corral.
Like cattle.
Yeah.
corral.
Where was this corral?
In Georgia
I
or
don't know
North
what place it
Carolina,
was.
wherever they started
Now,
from.
someone mentioned a place called Blue Spring.
Well,
I don't know. There's so
I
many
don't
different
know
stories. I don't know
exactly.
what they said,
Yeah.
what
I don't know exactly.
location. But that's the way they did, and then they just had to walk off and leave the horn. But there were some that run away, of course, and hid in the hills, and they're still there today. Some of the Cherokees are, you know.
Who was the leader of the group that your family came in? Was it
I don't
the,
remember. I wish I had.
Was it the Bushy Head group, or was it another?
I guess it was with Bushy Heads because they all located the same place. Because up here by Baptist
Yeah,
Mission.
they settled at the Baptist Mission then.
Mhm.
Do you have any stories about the side of the family that came on the boat?
Not very much. They just told how and that was a pretty hard trip too, you know, but on these boats, and they brought them down the river, and of course they had a lot of sick, and even I think some of their doctors that they had died on some kind of disease got among them while when they died on the boats, and some of them had babies born. I think James Starr, one of his children was born on that trip down the river. But
Don't you know that was pleasant riding?
But I don't know too much about what all they said about that.
Now, where did they settle from the boat? Where did they land?
Down here close to Fort Smith, somewhere around Fort Smith. And then I think they took them on down towards maybe Waver's Falls, somewhere down the Arkansas River. But these, I don't know how where they landed, they brought up here. That was the ones that come over the trails here. But the ones on the boat, now James Starr and them, they located Evansville, Arkansas, just over the line from Evansville. And I don't know if they left the boats at Fort Smith and come on to Evansville. It wouldn't be and I guess that's where they must have gotten off. And they came to Evansville, and his home was just over in this side of
Now, did they build Fort Gibson specifically for the Indians that were coming here?
No, I don't think so. I don't know how long that fort. I never did think about that.
That
was
was
a government fort, you know.
There during the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Fort Gibson was built 1824.
Well,
And that was
Before then.
it was already a fort, see.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
before then.
But now some of the Indians had come, different groups had come, you know, before. Some landed in Arkansas and stayed there for so long. And then finally, I think some of them stayed in Arkansas. But and a lot of them came on over into the Indian Territory, and they went in different directions around here. And there was different groups that come that listened to what the government told. And they decided they were going to have to come. But these last that came over the Trail of Tears, their chief that they were listening to, he thought that they wouldn't do that. They didn't think they'd be that bad, you know, to just force them out in and say, this is your land and we're going to hold it and we're going to stay here. But it didn't work out like that. They finally just took the troops in there and drove them out, made them leave. And so that was the ones that suffered worse coming on that way. There were several different groups that came before them.
How long did it take to travel from Georgia to Indian Territory?
Oh,
Well, there's on the road in the wintertime. They left
in the fall.
in the fall,
And I
and
forgot.
they traveled in the wintertime
I don't even know, but it was several months, I think. before
till
they-
spring. I think they got here in the spring.
Any idea what the death rate was?
No, I've heard, but I don't know.
About half of them, I
History
think.
tells
They
that,
sunk
but I
about half of them in the Mississippi River.
Have any of the graves been found along the trail?
I haven't heard
Not
of any.
to
I
my
really don't know.
knowledge.
I doubt it.
Do they basically know the route that the trail followed?
Yeah,
No,
I think history, but our family didn't know. But I think
like
history
to know.
has it. But I don't know which way they came. But they
Now, I've
didn't.
heard stories about Nancy Walker. In fact, I think Mavis said that was her ancestral grandmother.
Or Sally Walker.
Sally Walker.
Sally Walker. Okay, now,
I've forgotten her Indian name.
That's
Cleo
right.
used to tell me.
That was the lady I read about, Sally
Okay.
Walker.
now she came in the trail then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And after they came here, of course, it's when the Civil War came, they lived up in the woods up here around Baptist Mission, and they said, of course, the men all had to go to war, and just women were left home, and said that she'd have to butcher. Said she was a little woman, but said she'd take somebody to help her and tie this cow, whatever they were going to butcher, to a tree, and then she'd chop it in the head with an axe. And you just
They
imagine what
had
the
to
time.
do some way.
And then what they call bushwhackers would come, and that was the men that didn't want to fight. You know, they'd come in and take all their food, steal everything. We'll just go in and take it by force. And
Tear up the floor.
yeah,
planks
looking
in.
for their food because they got to where they'd hide it, and so. And then said some places they'd go in and they were out of clothes, these men that were hiding in the woods, so they just, and winter was coming on, and they'd even take their feather beds and take them out in the yard and just rip them open and scatter the feathers to get the material to make clothes for themselves. They did some of them like that up there. And said that Granny said they had a cave where they would hide their extra food when they'd have to go to Fort Gibson in an ox wagon to get their food. And then when they'd have some extra, but they'd just keep a little at the house and they'd put the other in this cave. And every time they went to the cave to get some food, they'd go a different path so they wouldn't make a trail that they could find their food. They'd have to go a different way.
Hmm. Which side did they fight on, north or south?
North.
North.
They were Republican, but our dads were Democrats.
Southerners.
They were Texans. See, they were slaveholders.
Mm-hmm.
His ancestors were, because they were white people. But
Now, was he in the war too?
yes,
Which side did,
You mean our father?
no, your
grandfather.
the grandfather.
Oh, grandfather, yes.
Did he
was in
fight on
Civil
the side
War.
of the north or the south?
South.
On the south.
Our grandpa on our father's side was,
Yeah, John Christie.
yeah,
Mhm.
he was fought on the south.
Yeah, okay.
Uh-huh.
So your family was basically split then?
Yes. But
Half went north and
there
half
never
went
seemed to
south.
be any friction, though. Everybody did what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother didn't vote very many times. Even after they let the women vote, she didn't take that much interest. Wouldn't vote. She thought that was the men's business.
Did you campaign for woman suffrage?
No. I was young at that time and I wasn't interested.
Well, that was, let me see. They passed the 19th Amendment.
I've forgotten what
Was
year
it
it was.
21, 22?
Somewhere along
And
there.
they finally
Mhm.
granted women the vote.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really interested.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of things that we weren't interested in a long time ago that we should have been, and it helped a whole lot in later years
Mhm.
to know that, because a lot of things that got passed that I should know.
Do you have any, I guess, Indian stories, Indian legends about the Cherokees?
They used to have a lot of them.
Yeah,
I
I
used to
can't
tell.
think right now.
Because I've heard one about the Sky Rock.
What?
The Sky Rock.
No, I don't know.
That's a big rock in the sky where the Cherokees came from.
No, I don't think I've ever even heard that.
And Florence Duncan mentioned about the little Nan.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
they call it housekeepers or
Uh-huh.
ganutties.
Ganani.
Yeah.
Now, what's his purpose? What does he do?
Well,
He
That
protected the
was
family. Protected
just
the
a
family. You know,
story.
I want to tell about Lizzie Walden. They was talking about today. They had a good interview with her.
Mhm.
I guess you did.
Right.
I taught up there, and I voted with them 2 years. Her family, her father and mother and them. And Jake, the boy they were talking about, lives right out here. He was just a little boy, 10 years old, and he believed all that. He was scared of things like that. We called them housekeepers. One night he came in late to eat supper. And supper was over, but he come in, and it's dark, and he was in the kitchen alone, eating his supper.
The girls was washing the dishes, you said.
Well, he was in the kitchen by
Yeah.
himself when this happened,
Oh,
and they had taken the ashes out of the stove, and it's left that metal thing in there, and coals fell down and made a noise, rattled, and it scared him. I was sitting in the front where I could see him, and he straightened up, and he looked around right quick, and he said, "We've got something good." on the table in order to eat. He thought the housekeeper wanted to be fed. He said, "We've got something good," and they had turnips. The first time they'd had turnips since the new turnips
thought it
came
was
in,
cabbage.
and he thought that's what it was. So he just took it. Said, "It must be these turnips." And he forked some turnips, and slung them over his shoulder. He's afraid to look around to feed the housekeeper. He just slung them over back toward the stove. And that was a true story. I thought that, and he believed that. He'd heard that, and he was so scared. But I don't
Now,
know
we
if they-
don't believe it, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's old Indian stories.
Yeah.
Of course, we're Indians, but,
But now Florence's family, and a lot of these Indians lived more in that kind of life that our people did. Now, both sides of our family lived more like white, but they had the Indian in them, and they believed in the Indian ways a whole lot, you know. But of course, Grandma Christie had been raised as a white woman, see, down in Texas, and these others were educated and were Christians and didn't believe in this ghosts and
they
spirits, you
were
know.
speaking about churches and schools when John and everybody was here. The little town of Christie was named for Grandpa Christie.
Mm-hmm.
And our mother organized and taught the first school that was ever taught at Christie.
School.
She was a school teacher 15 years before statehood.
Before she ever married.
She and my father both, there was a female and a male seminary at Tahlequah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, he went to the male seminary and she went to the female seminary before statehood.
Now, was this the old seminary before it burned?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yes.
Uh-huh.
Did she ever talk about what life was like at the seminary?
Well,
Seemed
kinda.
good to her.
A little
She
bit.
did. And they had Miss, what's the teacher's name? She was such a good teacher. She always talked about. But
What was the teacher's name? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
I used to know it real well. I've forgotten it now. I may think of it later. But she was the principal, and she was the teacher. She told what a good.
Wilson? Was that
Yes,
her?
Miss Wilson. Florence Wilson.
Mhm.
And it was this old building they have now at the college, you know, that's where she
Yeah,
went.
that's a seminary
after they
hall.
rebuilt. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, did the seminaries were just one big building, or was it a series of buildings?
I think it was one,
As far as I went there after I was,
not
teacher.
not the female seminary.
I didn't go to
you
seminary,
did.
but at the same building. But at that time, it was just one building. Then they began to build these
Oh,
other.
they built. We both went to school at Northeast years ago.
Did she ever talk about like living in the building, what it was like, what the building looked like?
She lived in the dormitory, huh?
Yeah, well, it was in the same building. She lived upstairs, and she had a roommate, and her roommate was a sister to W.W. Hastings' wife, Lula, Sister Lula. She was, and so they roomed together, and she said that they had strict rules, and everybody had to abide by them, and so. She liked it. She thought it was all right, everything. She was a strict teacher when she taught.
Did they take their meals there at the
Yes.
seminary?
Yes, they had a dining room, and they had upper classmen, I guess you'd say, and then they had what do they call these that were orphans and couldn't pay. These others had to pay a little bit of tuition, you know, but these others didn't have it, and they helped in the kitchen and dining room and helped with the work around, you know. But these others that paid didn't have to help with the work. And her mama paid her while she was with these others, and they were stars, you see, that she roomed with.
What was the curriculum there? What she studied?
I don't know. They had math and the main things that they taught, usually math and reading and
Reading and
geography.
writing and arithmetic. You've heard that.
Yeah.
How old were the kids that went to these seminaries?
Well, they had some primaries, what they called it, little. They had some small ones there that were orphans, and somebody, I guess the government put them there, and they just grew up there, and they were for children on up to older teachers, older people.
Was it like a college also, the seminary?
I think so. Yes.
Like after high
Similar.
school?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. How many girls were at the female seminary at one time?
I don't have any idea. I forgot. I never did.
I don't know
think
whether
of it.
Mama ever said. I don't know
I
whether
don't
she
know.
ever said. I don't remember.
Did she ever say about how big the room was she stayed in or what the room looked like?
No, just just an ordinary bedroom, I guess. With we'd always seen them be. They had their usual furniture and their trunks. Each one of them had a trunk in there. They had separate beds. These two roomed together.
They had uniforms there?
No, I don't
The
think so.
primaries, I believe, did. I think the ones
I
that
don't
had
think
their
Mama
work.
did.
No, she didn't.
No.
Do you have any like books or clothes or anything that she had at the seminary?
Do we have any?
Yeah.
Oh, do we
No,
have
I
that
don't.
now?
Do we have any?
No, not
No, I don't. I know.
We've moved and stored and
Uh-huh.
scattered our stuff.
What about the male seminary? Was it basically the same as the female
I
seminary?
think so.
Yeah. So they were arranged just alike except one was for the men, one was for the women. Where'd you all start school?
Christie. When they how they started, my folks, their allotment was out 3 miles from town here, and we lived there. And then when we were getting big enough to go to school, Mama, it was 3 miles to Westville and 3 miles down to Green, and it's all woods, and we couldn't go that far. And so she wanted to move to town or somewhere where we could go to school. And Grandpa Christie was getting old, and he wanted Papa to come down there and live down there and run his farm for him. So Mama didn't want to go. She said there's no school there, and she wanted to go to school. So Grandpa said, well, we'll build a school if you'll move down here, and I'll build your house. So they agreed, and so they did built a house for us, just a 3-room box house. And then he gave 1 acre for a school, joined that run in the corner of his land. And so then to start the school, Mama talked to the neighbors around about a school, how they needed school, and a church. They didn't have any Sunday school. So they had a musical at our house one night and invited the neighbors to come in so she could talk to them about it. And so they had music, all stringed instruments, and so she told them what she wanted, and so they were all anxious. At that time, there's quite a few white people had moved in at that time, and they were a lot of grown girls and boys that hadn't had much education, because after they moved in Indian Territory, if they went to school, Indian schools, they had to pay tuition, and they said they weren't able to pay it so much a month, and so very few of them got to go to school. So they agreed that they'd like to help to get to school, and she thought she would get to school. So they started to work, and Grandpa deeded his land. See, he had already had his allotment there, and that was before statehood. But so the men cut timber. Different ones gave timber. They cut timber and hauled it to a sawmill. And for the rough part of the building, they built a little house. It wasn't too big a house, a little box house. And so then they all worked and helped build the house. And our mother come to town, Westville, and solicited funds to buy windows and doors and whatever other supplies they needed there, from the businessmen. And I don't know how much. I'm sorry we never did think about getting all that down, but I don't know how much she made, but she got enough to buy the things that they needed for the school.
Windows and stuff
And they
like
made
that.
benches for us, of course, the men did. So when they finished it, then she and Papa got in the wagon and went to Tahlequah to the Board of Education and told them what they wanted and all. So they gave them the school. I think that they had so many schools in our district, and they couldn't put in a new one unless one died. One school died, and I don't know what school Christie took the place of it. Anyway, they gave them a school at Christie, and they said, well, we'll just name it Christie, because Grandpa had given the land, and said, we'll appoint you. And I think what is it, J.W. Brewer or whatever his name was, some of the educational men. He said, we'll appoint you. She hadn't taught for several years after she married. Appoint you the first teacher to get the thing organized. And they went to get the supplies. They got the books and everything that they needed there and brought it back in a wagon. And so that's how she became the first teacher. And so she was the first teacher we went to school. She wasn't old enough to go to school yet. And so, and then they had a full school. I don't know how many there were, but I remember it was my first school, and there were grown women, those young girls that moved in and hadn't got to go, and they wore long skirts. They'd grown with long skirts.
Come down to the ankles.
About 2 from every family, 2 or 3 from every family, and there was a house full of big people. And so I can remember how that, and of course she taught that time, they called it. From that, they went on from that.
Ned Christie.
He wasn't related to us. We don't claim Ned. We've got enough outlaws on our side. No, that bunch of Christies are Indians. Ned Christie and them. And
we're Indian too, but
from our
but
grandma's
the Christian
side,
name,
the
with
Christian
them
name
is
of ours.
Indian. And our grandpa Christie was white man from Texas.
So Ned and his family, they were a different bunch of Christians. Papa said he used to claim kin with him anyhow. He said he was related to him, and he said he didn't know he might have been. You couldn't ever tell the way they was all mixed up. But
Who were the outlaws in your family?
Tom Starr
Tom
and Henry
Starr
Starr.
and Henry. You know Henry Starr, I heard of him.
And Tom, that was Grandma's brother. That when his dad was killed, when they killed his dad that time out towards Evansville, they said he was just a big boy, and he said he'd kill every one of them before.
Tom Starr was Grandma's brother.
I said, before he was going to kill the only man that was in that group, before he grew beard, and he didn't even have a beard yet. And so he started out, and he almost succeeded. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 that they said that he did. And of course he was an outlaw, and he's out in the woods.
They told that he killed 33 men. Of course, I don't know.
You
That
know,
was the
his history
story.
said 100
Yeah.
men or something, but they said that wasn't true. They just blamed a lot of it on him, you know.
Did you all know Henry Starr?
No, my father did. He used to come in to Grandpa Christie's and
Uncle Tom did.
yeah.
Uncle Tom used to come.
Uncle
One
Tom,
time he
yeah.
come in when he was staying in the woods. They called it on the scout.
Yeah.
And so he came in to eat, and so Grandma fixed his dinner. He ate his dinner, and in just a little while, they heard horses coming, and then he knew somebody was coming, and he went out the back door, and she went out with him and said they had taken the bed off of the wagon and turned it bottom up, you know, and said she just lifted the end of that up, and he crawled under there, and she let it down and went on around the place. And when the men rode up, they asked her if Tom Starr was there, or had been there, and she said he just left. And he said, well, which way did he go? She told him which way he went. So they just rode by and went on and looking for him, and she went and let him out, and he left.
You told that Indian stories a while ago. They said that he had put his horseshoes on backwards. I don't know how
So
they
they take the
did.
back trail.
And they'd be tracking him, and he'd be going the opposite direction. That's what the stories.
Papa liked he was a hero for our dad because, well, they felt like he was justified when he started out. Of course, he just got meaner, I guess, but because they killed his dad, you know, for no reason, you might say. And they felt like that he was justified, and he was Papa's hero.
What were they like, Tom Starr and Henry Starr? What kind of people were they?
They
Well-
were good people.
Yeah, they said they were, and they made their own livings, you know, and all. They farmed, of course.
The story was that Uncle Tom would go south into Texas, I guess, and steal. You know, years ago, people used to call black people niggers, you know, and said he'd go south and steal niggers and bring them up north and sell them and steal horses and mules and take them south. He had a good trade, huh? But that's the story. I don't know
He
whether
might
that's
have
true or
been.
not now.
They did get by with a lot of things then that they wouldn't anymore, but
See, the country wasn't settled thick like it is now,
Mhm.
you know.
What kind of mischief did you two get into as kids?
She was a mean one.
Oh, I've had to answer for her all our lives. She'd do mean things and then fix it so it looked like I did it, you know. And Mom would catch it. Somebody did it, and she'd deny it, and I'd deny it, and I'd be the one that'd be close, and Mom would believe it was me, you know.
She was a tattletale.
And she whipped me because she thought I was telling a story. It wasn't because what she had done it. She thought I was telling a story, and she didn't allow us to lie, so she'd give me a whipping.
She was a tattletale. Everything
told
I
Mama
done,
about
she'd
it
say,
after
I'm
she's
going to tell
grown.
Mama on you. I'd say, tattletale.
What stuff did y'all do?
Huh?
What would you do to get her in trouble?
Oh, what did we do?
Oh, you did
Little old
everything.
things that didn't amount to hill beans.
Mom was kind of strict because she was a strict teacher, and that she'd started out like
She
that.
was strict with us.
We didn't run around the neighborhood or anything.
Didn't go to the neighbor's house and drank coffee every morning.
What was the first funeral you all went to?
First what?
First funeral.
I don't remember.
Oh, I don't either.
I don't even remember.
We were small, but I can't remember.
I don't remember.
I remember the first baptizing in the creek I ever saw was down at Green, that Indian community, you know.
Mhm.
And this old lady had, I guess it was arthritis, they said rheumatism at that time, you know, and she couldn't walk, she was old, and they took her out in the creek in a chair, and dipped the chair and all in the water. I remember that, and that stayed with me. I never forgot it. She was this little.
I don't remember even the first baptism.
Mhm.
But anyway,
What are some of your favorite dishes that your mother used to cook?
pie and cake, cobbler pie, huckleberry pie.
I guess we liked
People roamed the woods and picked huckleberries, you know, blackberries. They had an orchard, my folks did, and what we used to do, her and me, we used to climb up in the tree. The ground would be covered with the apples, and of course they were some of them good, overripe, but we'd climb the trees just like a bunch of boys and get up there and pull an apple and take a bite. Well, that's no good. We'd throw it off and pull another one, just wasting them, you know. But we'd done that. I remember that.
Do you all have a recipe for fry bread?
No.
Don't have no
we was always-
recipe on my head, in my head.
How do you make it?
How do you make it?
We asked you.
Well,
either one, both of you.
Just flour, and some people use warm water, don't they?
And baking powder.
But,
And a little shortening and
and a little salt. Not much shortening, because you try it in grease, you know. That's a little baking powder.
but our mother used milk in hers, but you
Yeah.
know the Indians don't use milk very much. They don't drink milk much, but she used milk when she made hers.
The full-blood Indians didn't like milk.
How come?
I don't know. They'd have
Now the
woods.
Cherokees did way back, but late it seemed like these later Indians are the
Uh-huh.
one full-bloods now that don't like it.
I remember one time Aunt Sally lived down Chewy, our aunt, and one man, there was a full-blood man and his wife, I used to know the name but I forgot, come by Aunt Sally's, and he said, Sally, said, my wife's just getting like a white woman. He was going to the store, you know, and she said, well, why? And said, every time I go to the store nearly, said she'll say, get soda and baking powder. And I said, I wondered what they made, how they made the bread if they didn't use one of them. A white woman.
But I do remember that our folks way back didn't use both. They used soda and milk in their bread and salt, and they didn't use baking powder.
They
Didn't think it's good for you. They used it if they baked cakes or something, but just everyday biscuits. You know, most people made biscuits, and they didn't believe in that. And they didn't use much salt because old Granny was talking about when she was a little girl, said she was sick for a long time. I guess she had typhoid fever or something. And they wouldn't give her any salt because they said salt wasn't good for you, and they didn't use much salt, but they had it to use for certain things. And they had it in a gourd hanging on the wall at the foot of her bed where she, and said she was just really wanted salt, and so said that she was getting better. She was getting well by that time, and so when they were all out of the room, said she got up and held to the bed and went around to that and got her some salt out of that gourd and ate it and went back and got in bed. They never did know it and said she got well. I guess the body did call for the salt or something, but that she always told that. But they thought it wasn't healthful to use salt, very much salt.
Mm-hmm.
And the Osage Indians don't salt their food when they cook it. They put salt shakers on, but you can salt it yourself if you want, but they don't put food. We lived among the Osages for years.
We did.
My husband was a Shawnee Indian, and he worked among the Osages, and that's where I was.
Mm-hmm. When did you get married?
And to Bartlesville.
When, he said.
Oh, April the 2nd, 1927.
In Bartlesville?
Bartlesville.
What was your husband's name?
William K. Prophet. He was a Shawnee Indian.
When did you get married?
April the 17th, 1923.
What's your husband's name?
Francis E. Langley. We called him Frank all the time. He lives in Bartlesville.
Just the last few years.
Of course, asking that, Bartlesville is a big town. You wouldn't know everybody. That was like Stella Morris, May, that her sister lived in Westwood, California, way back from the coast. And she wrote and told her sister, said, I'd come to see you, but I'm afraid I'd fall in the ocean. And it was 300 miles to the coast. That's what they said. They said, "Girl."
When we was married in Bartlesville, they still had rails where they'd had their streetcars. They weren't running anymore, of course, but the rails were still there. And the guy went with us when we went to get married. He said that a man came to town and stood on the corner half a day, and finally he asked somebody, said, well, what time does the streetcars come by? Said, I don't know. Said, I've lived here 20 years and I haven't seen one come by yet.
How big was Christie, the town?
Well, there's no town. There's one store there now. At one time they had 2 stores and a barber shop, and a cafe, and a post office.
Thriving little village. Of course, the Frisco Railroad run through there, and the depot, and a post office, and about 2 or 3 stores, and a barber shop. Even had a taxi cab,
Cafe.
and a cafe, and it is.
But see, after the railroad went out,
time.
and after the rural carriers went through, then they killed the post office and the railroad.
You actually, when you travel 62 highway, Christie's off the road. You don't go
There's
through
just
it.
a store there now.
You would never know it anyway if you went through it. I know. I used to get letters from boys, and they thought it was so funny. My name was Christie, Annie Christie, Oklahoma. They think it's funny that my name is the same as the town.
Who was the postmaster in Christie?
Different ones. Our sister was postmaster one time in later years. Our old
Who
sister.
were the first ones?
I've got it in some of my.
I can't even remember.
I don't
Usually
remember.
the man that had the store, general store, then he had the post office in his place. Then later years they just had a little store.
I've
post
got
office.
it written down someplace.
J.A. Taylor was one of them.
yeah.
And,
But there's been several.
Did your parents ever talk about the Zeke Proctor incident?
Well, yes.
They were knew. Our mother told us. I don't think that agrees with what Lizzie Walden's. That's her grandpa, you know. Said, but Mama said that they were friends, Zeke Proctor and Grandpa still, and Grandpa lived just out of town here, about a mile, past this intersection, and so Grandpa went to feed his horses early one morning, just daybreak, and said Zeke Proctor come out of the cornfield by the barn, and said he'd come in and said he cried and he said, Tom, I did something I wouldn't have done for anything in the world. He said, well, what happened? And he said, I killed a woman yesterday. And then he told him about killing that woman, you know, when they had that fight, and he said that he couldn't stop his shot. He shot at the man, and she stepped in front of him, and he killed the woman and said he felt bad about it. Then from that, I don't know why the story goes about what he did, but anyhow, Grandpa knew him. And when they were having a trial over at Whitmire Prairie, they'd moved it to the schoolhouse for safety because they knew they were going to have trouble. And Grandpa had been going every day to the trial and said and some of them, I don't know if he's the one that saw people standing around. It was a log house, and they punched the chinking out of the log so they could see in from different points. And so the day that they had the fight, Grandpa didn't go. Something he had to do, or somebody got sick or something. He didn't get to go that day, and that's the day they had the fight, and all those men got killed there, you know. But that was...
Speaking of Lizzie Walden, her grandpa, Zeke Proctor.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Well, you know, there's her mother and Miss Crittenden and Zeke.
Miss Six Killer.
Yeah, was triplets. They was triplets.
No, not Lizzie's mother. Mrs. Six Killer and Mrs. Crittenden and their brother, Willie Proctor.
Oh yeah,
triplets.
Triplets anyway, and said Proctor was plowing in the field. This is the story now, and somebody probably made it up. I don't know, and said he's plowing, and when the first baby was born, well, said somebody went to the field and told Proctor that he had a baby at the house. Well, after a while, they went down to tell him the second one was born. And so they went back, and then the third one was born. There's triplets, and said he went down there and told him that he had 3 babies. He said, whoa, to the horse. He said, I've got to go to the house and put a stop to that. That was the story, yeah.
What about the flu epidemic of 1918?
Well, I had it.
It was bad. It was bad.
You was the first one had it in our family, huh?
I guess, I don't know. I was teaching up here about close to Strawberry Springs. It was school. That's my first school I was teaching at. And I'd go home weekends. And I remember Mama had the flu, and then our older sister had the flu. And she had a small baby, and he had the flu.
And then I had it.
Yeah, but you had to wait on them.
Yeah, I had to stay out of school and wait on the rest of them. But, and after all that, then I took it. See, it was really bad.
I can't remember, though, anybody right around in our community dying from it.
Chris Walters' family.
I thought that was pneumonia, maybe it was.
Huh?
I thought that was pneumonia they all died with. Might have been the flu, but I thought the whole family died. The woman and
maybe it was later.
The grown daughter and little daughter and her son, and the others were sick. And they lived in 2-room house. The neighbors had to take care of them.
Speaking of the Proctor fight, wasn't that over at Whitmire?
Yeah, that's where they had the fight when they was trying him. But when that fight that they talked about went up here close to.
Oh yeah,
on 33.
but that fight at Whitmire.
Yeah. Yeah, that's when they was trying Zeke Proctor.
Uh-huh, that's what I mean.
He said when they started to shoot and they shot, then the first shot killed the judge. That's what the story we remember. And said he just fell on a desk, and Zeke Proctor grabbed his gun and went out the back door and got away. Went up the hill in the woods. And that's why they didn't get Zeke Proctor. But he started shooting at them, and he killed a bunch of them, you see. And he got away. And but the judge and several was killed. I think there's 7 or 9 men altogether.
That was for the school. I taught school at Whitmire. And that spot, you know.
In the flu epidemic, what kind of medicines or home remedies did you all use?
Vic Salves. All I remember, they bought out all the Vic Salve in all the towns around. That's all, and it was kind of a new thing. And
What was it?
Vic Salve.
Vicks.
Oh, Vicks. Yeah.
And it's just a common thing, you know, something like mentholatum, and it was kind of new at that time, and that's all I can remember them ever. They bought out all they had in the town here and every place else. They'd have to send it, and that's all they ever used. I guess it helped. 'Cause, flu was new, and they didn't hardly know how to handle it. You know, that's why so many people died.
How'd that flu start?
I don't know. I don't know. I just remember when there was a bunch of people who were getting sick, and
Someone mentioned that the soldiers brought it back from World War One.
I don't know. It was in 1918, I know.
That was before George Smith come back,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Was there much organized work for the war effort around here?
For the war? No, not too much. They tried to, and in the towns especially, you know. I can remember they'd knit sweaters for the soldiers and things like that. All the girls wrote to the soldier boys. I remember there's trains to go through town. They'd throw the letter of their name and address for them to write to them, you know. And she had a boyfriend like that. And, you know, they just hang out.
When he got back to the States, I wrote to him about 3 years. I said he is moon-eyed. I didn't like the looks of his pictures.
She never did see him. He was
I
coming.
never did see him.
He was coming to see her then, so she could
When
write.
he got back to New York, well, he wrote to me and told him he is glad he is back in the good old USA. And he was from Texas, and he was going back home and then come to see me, and I quit writing to him. I didn't want him to come to see me.
Ever hear from him anymore?
No. We have some cousins that lives in Texas, and they was laughing about it. I think they was the one that give him my name, really.
We're just wasting your time with all this stuff.
What about Armistice Day, when the war ended?
I was at school, but I can remember how they talked about, you know, about all the horns and whistles and all the commotion going on. And I can remember hearing there was a lot of excitement. See, when we were out in the country, it wasn't like in town where they learned more about that, and too many people to get together, but scattered out in the country. I didn't know Jack was back there.
Yeah, I did. We're talking too long, huh?
No. Just say you allow people to sit in.
Oh, yeah.
I think we're about through.
I'm hoping
Surely.
you got everything.
Elmay's
heard.
talking to
How far did you all go through school?
Well, we went, I did, I'm talking for myself, she can answer for herself. I went 3 summers at Northeastern, and I went 1 year in California in college, in Susanville.
Susanville, California?
Uh-huh.
What college is there?
Junior college.
What years did you go to Northeastern?
Well, let me see, 19 and it was about 1920.
When you finished?
No, 1919 when I taught Sanders School. I guess it was that summer. I started about 1919
And you
and
went 3
20 and
summers?
21.
Okay. Did you live on campus?
No.
Did you
We
board out?
boarded at the lady's house.
Who'd you board with?
Granny Powell. What was her first name?
Sarah. And
Sarah
Cy, the
Powell.
old man's name was Cy.
Uh-huh.
We boarded there several years, every summer.
Did you board there too?
Uh.
So you roomed and boarded it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the name was Pyle?
Yes. Pyle.
What'd you study?
I forgot. been too many years ago.
Mrs. Prophet, what'd you study?
Well, in different subjects, different years. I don't have. I can't tell how many years I went. We just went summer school now. I just finished the 10th grade. We had at that time they had through the 10th grade, and we called them 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th at that time. And we finished the 10th grade down there, and then after that we didn't get any credits for it because it wasn't accredited. And then I went up here, but I didn't finish the term, and so from that time I taught school on a county certificate. You know, a lot of times that most of them started at that time on county certificates.
Mhm.
However, I hadn't finished high school, so then I just made credits through the summer when we were during vacation. We go to Tahlequah, and that's when I was at Tahlequah, and made credits. And I just studied the things that we had to have. I had math. I had went up through geometry. I had plain geometry. I didn't get into solid. And I had what else did I have? We studied
I don't
Oklahoma
know, I
history.
don't
And one
remember
summer
them all.
during the war in 1918, I had to take military training because we were supposed to teach at school. We just had squads right and left and all that kind of stuff, you know. And I told her the other day, I said, I don't know how we lived in those hot summers.
Hot
And
summertime.
we wore long skirts and long sleeves and how we dressed then. And we'd have to march from that college plumb down Main Street through Muskogee Avenue, I guess, plumb through there. And then they'd let us take our time going back, but we'd have to march down there in the heat of the day. And in summer, in July and August, and I don't know how we lived, but nobody ever died. I suppose I have heard it. But let's see, what else did I have? I had Oklahoma history, and of course, you know, it's American history. I had American history part one time, and what all did I have? Just
I said it's been so long, I forgot.
that's with me. My mind doesn't work good anymore.
Where did the Pyles live? What part of town?
Or different places. They just rented, and they lived down on Muskogee Avenue, 2 different places when I stayed with her. And I don't know what the address was up in
I
the
don't
north,
know.
south.
Oh, they had more than one house then?
No,
They
they
rented.
moved. They moved from one summer to another. Maybe they'd be in a different place, but we stayed with them. Yeah, I
Okay.
did stay at different places. I've forgotten the place I stayed. Once I had to board at a different place, but they moved to about 3 different locations.
Well, now,
I
I
would-
went 3 summers there, and then after I married, I went to school again, over Northeastern.
Yeah. In Tahlequah? Okay. How big was Northeastern when you all went there? How many
Well, it
students?
wasn't nothing like it is now. Just
That
Just
main big
one
pretty
building,
and
I
the
guess,
seminary
to the
was there, of course.
big
What,
building.
Seminary
And they had
Hall?
a gable building. I believe that's what they call it. They call it that. At that time, when they first built it, it was a square building. And I don't know the buildings anymore, what they are, but there's another one. They didn't have too many buildings at that time.
What was in Seminary Hall when you were going there?
I don't know.
What was
Offices, I
that?
guess. I can't even remember.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
that's been 70 years ago.
Who was president of the university when you were going there,
Dr.
of the
Gable.
college? Ma'am?
Dr. Gable,
Dr. Gable? What was he like?
just kind of a
not a fat
mean
man.
looking.
He's a
kind-
mean
he was
man.
no, he was a nice man, but he's kind of, there wasn't much foolishness about him. Kind of a reserved type, I thought. Of course, I was pretty bashful myself, so that didn't bother me any. But when I
Were
was
you
a
all flappers in the 20s?
Huh?
Were you all flappers in the 20s?
Not I. She might have been. I was bashful when I was a kid. I said when company would come, I'd go out the back door just like a scared cat.
What about you?
She was into everything.
Were you a flapper?
No. Wasn't no flapper.
You see,
I said I wasn't no flapper.
she had plenty of boyfriends. Had one on every corner.
Were there many flappers at Northeastern?
Not too many at that time.
No, I don't think so, really.
Everything is pretty strict rules on campus and off campus, and so it wasn't like today. It's so different.
Mm-hmm.
And since we've been working in schools now, why, the educational system is
The schools are
entirely
altogether different now, this day and time, than they were 65 years ago.
What's different about them?
well, it was
Well,
stricter.
you could heard a pin drop in the schoolroom years ago, and the teacher would say anything, now you minded, but not today. We've been working, she and I, on the foster grandparent program down here at Zion School out from Stilwell. If I had sense enough to be a school teacher this day and time, I wouldn't want it. I'd prefer anything else but a school teacher.
Well, everything has changed to the teachers. Of course, now a lot of teachers aren't qualified. I can see that from me, what little education I have. I can see that in the teachers. Every school I worked at Watts one year. But still, I think they're kind of handicapped according to the rules of the system. Well, it seems to me, because they have to pass. We had some children in the grades, and some from the fourth. I worked in the fourth this year, up in the fifth and sixth, and they passed them, and they cannot read, can't spell, they can't do first grade work. But they were required. They said if they don't pass them, they're getting old enough, they'd be dropouts. And they're trying to keep them in school. That's the way it seems to me now. They didn't come out right and tell it in that words, but it seems like they're trying to keep them in school till they're older. I don't know what good it's going to do, but they said that if they just go ahead and fail them.
I saw on TV one night, it's been, a year ago, and a boy had graduated from high school. It showed him with his diploma up there, and they told him to read what all it said. And he said, I can read my name, but I can't read the other. High school graduate. I saw that on TV.
Well, I know some that, and then down there I worked in the fifth last year, and they couldn't have done second grade work. Some of them. Of course, now we work with slow learners too, but some of them would have been capable. But I think that I don't know when they started out, the teachers were too busy to give them special care, and they got behind. And then the parents were the same type. They wasn't interested enough to help them at home and push them along, and so they got behind. And then from that, well, every year they just pass them on, and they don't know any better.
Where did you start teaching?
Down here at Strawberry Springs, and it's Pleasant Hill. They call it Goat Ridge afterwards, when I taught there. I taught first school, and then I taught at Christie.
What year did you start?
Pardon?
What year did you start teaching?
1918.
How would you compare your classroom to a classroom today?
I don't know. It wouldn't be much comparison.
What was your class like? Describe your class to me, your first one.
We had all 8 grades, country school. We called it primer class, from the primer to the 8th, including the 8th. I want to tell you that when I taught school at Whitmire, I had 90 enrolled in one room, 3 on a seat. There was 2 schools in the district, and because I was an Indian, it wasn't because I was the best teacher, and I don't misunderstand me.
Had a lot
But
of Indians in this district.
yeah, there was lots of Indians, and they wouldn't go to this other school. Grace Sassnett was the teacher. I remember her name, and they would come to my school, and they told me I didn't have to teach them if I didn't want to, but I hated to refuse them. You know, they were Indians, and they come to me, I believe, because I was an Indian. And she had about 30, I had 90 in one room. And my schoolroom was not only me, but others roundabout, was quieter than 20 is in a schoolroom this day and time. Not running the teacher down. The teacher is handicapped. And a lot of the parents, I hate to say this, is the cause of it.
Yes. How'd you handle 90 students?
Well, you sat down there, and they was quiet.
How did you teach 8 grades at one time?
Well,
Well, you had
you did.
real
Jack, you remember, I guess, having 8th grade.
Yes.
And we called them to the front. We didn't pick them out all over the room. They took them to a recitation bench in front for the class. And we had this class up here, and these were quiet back here, while these were. And we didn't make a lot of noise
So
up
did you
here.
teach each grade for a certain amount of time and then the next grade?
Each
or-
grade
Yeah,
had
and
so
then
many
call
subjects.
the next grade up and the next one, and if they didn't come up to if they didn't know anything at the end of the school, you didn't pass them. They stayed in that grade another year. But this day and time, they just pass them, whether they know anything or not. That's right.
We're not supposed to talk about our schools.
Excuse me.
Our schools, but
Erase that if you can.
I've been able to put a lot of that in there.
You throw that in the way.
Okay, I will.
Now, I'm not saying every school is like that.
Now, we patterned, or I did, after Mama, our mother, when she taught. First day of school, she had about 10 rules written on the board. And we're supposed to whisper, not leave your seat without permission, and all these rules, you know. Couldn't chew gum in the schoolroom, and all that kind of stuff. You have to raise your hand before you come up to ask a question and whatnot. So, when I started, I did the same thing. And so, that makes a lot of difference. And you stick to it, and don't let when they know that they are not supposed to. Well, and we whipped them then. They're not allowed to whip them now unless they're having a witness, you know. They paddle them 2 or 3 times with a witness. You have to call another teacher and the witness.
Now.
But we used the hickory switches.
Hazelnut switches, boy, them long, and they just wrap around you.
We stopped out at Annie saw. What's that boy's name?
Dale.
Hastings?
Yesterday, I broke my hoe handle, and I stopped down there to buy a hoe, and at Stillwell. And this fella's daddy went to school to me. I asked him, I said, which Dale are you, and who is your father? And he told me, and his father went to school to me. Of course, he's old now, that fella.
But Annie asked saw a man ask him if he was the one that had gone to school to me when I taught at Proctor. And he said, yeah. I said, I've got this. Said, she's the meanest teacher I ever had. I said, I've got the scars to show it yet. I think he made that because I wasn't that bad, I don't think, but he knew he had to do what I told him to.
This Dale boy I was speaking over that yesterday, I saw his daddy. I could whip that boy, and he was overgrown boy, great big, and bigger than me. Maybe not now, but anyway, I could. First I'd make all the kids go out and shut the doors and keep him in there by himself, so they wouldn't be a sniggering around laughing, about me a whipping him. And he didn't more care. I never did make that boy cry. So I got
She
to
just
just whipping him, call him up on the stage and whip him before the whole school. And he didn't cry. But his parents told me to. They couldn't make him mind. He wasn't really a mean boy.
You're just a mean teacher.
1930s.
Oh,
How did the Depression affect your two families?
Oh, that was rough. I hate to think about what that was like. I was married at that time.
1930.
Worked for a
So
dollar
far
a
back
day.
I can't remember.
Bill and I married right in the middle of the Depression, and it was really rough. But he just had I guess in a way it was an easy job. He was a chauffeur for chief of the Osages, and so that's where we lived. And of course, I had to be a chauffeur for his
Was
wife.
that Mr. Tinker?
No, Chief Lookout.
Oh, Fred
way
Lookout.
way before
Okay.
Tinker. But yeah, we lived there for years, and Bill was his driver, and then I drove for the old lady part time.
So you live in, how come you moved to Pawhuska?
Pawhuska.
How come you moved there?
Well, that's when we married. We moved to Pawhuska. He was already working for Lookouts when I married him.
What did your husband do for? That was, what, William Prophet, that's your husband? What was he doing for the Lookouts?
Driving.
Driving?
He was a chauffeur. They was on the road every day. See, he was chief at that time, and they were just the office and back, and here and then they was calling on that old man all over the county, and here and in Tulsa and back. And, they had a lot of money at that time, and they was just spending it, just going here and there, and they were on the road all the time.
What was Fred Lookout like?
He was a good man. He was a real nice man. He talked broken English, but he was very intelligent. And he had been educated for about a year or two, I guess, in Carlisle, but you see, they farmed him out, and they worked in homes during that time. But then they brought him home when he got to be, I forgot how old, 16, 17 years old, for getting him schooled to get married. They were going to marry him off, see. So he just stayed a few years at Carlisle, and they brought him back home. And the old lady went there for a little while, and she worked out in French homes or something, Dutch, or whoever was out there. They'd farm out in their homes and let them learn to do, like taking care of the home and everything. So she worked there, and then when they brought her home, and they married him off. And then like the Indian weddings do, So, and that's when they're educated. But her grammar, English was perfect. You hear her talk in another room, you'd think it was a highly educated person, and she just went to the 3rd grade. When she'd buy groceries in the store, whole list of groceries, they'd be adding them up, and she'd just take her fingers like this, and she'd have it already figured up before they got through, And, but they were good people, real nice people.
My daughter Mavis was born in Hominy, Osage County.
That's right. When did you move over there?
When I married in 1923, and we lived here in Westville, and we left, my husband and I. And to tell you the truth, my father didn't like my husband.
So how come you left?
Yeah, they left while he was out of town.
And we went to Hominy and lived there. He worked in oil fields, and
What did he do in the oil fields?
pardon me.
What did your husband do in the oil fields?
Well, first job he was worked on a tank farm, what they call those big tanks, And then we went, moved to Seminole, and he got a broken back. He was a rig builder, but he didn't get his back broke building rigs. They was waiting for supplies to come in, and he went out with a contractor one morning, and the trailer hitch broke on the trailer and stuck down and threw the man 60 feet, and he got a broken back and killed one man, and then he was in the hospital in Oklahoma City exactly 1 year to a day.
Mhm.
He got hurt the 21st of October in 1934 and got out in 21st of October in 35.
Hmm.
And then we moved back here, and then he went back to the oil fields, and then we went to California. It's gone about 30 years.
How come you went to California?
Depression days. You know, all the Okies went that way.
So you were
know?
the John
We
Steinbeck
didn't want to
Okies.
starve to death.
Tell me about the trip to California.
Well, my husband went first.
Just like the Jodes.
Yeah, just like the Jodes. My husband went first with his nephew and wife. And really, he was crippled. It broke his back. And he walked with 2 walking sticks for years, 6, 7 years. And while he was back here, he bought and sold livestock with Tom Woods. Jack knows Tom Woods. He's an old man now.
Mm-hmm.
And then his nephew lived in California, and he come back here. He was newly married, and he went out there to see his sister, his only sister. He didn't go to work, but shortly before that, he had laid his walking sticks aside. His back got better. He wore a plaster Paris cast around his body first for years, and then when they took that off, they put a steel brace on him, and when he walked with walking sticks.
He
So-
already got rid of that though when he went to California.
Yeah, and he went. He had 2 brothers, I guess, and a sister lived in California. And he went out there, and it was a sawmill town. And he wrote and told me he went in October, and that he got a job in the plywood plant. Well, of course, he was about all right then. And he said, I'm coming back after you, and we always called her Brazine, that's her first name, middle name. And so he come back, and we had cattle, and he sold all the cattle. He told me to sell them, and I wouldn't sell them. And so when he come back, he just went to selling cattle right and left.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to California. That's how come. That was in 42, in January, when I went. He went in October in 41.
How'd you go to California?
In a car. We
In a
had a car.
What kind of car?
See, Lafayette,
Well, how'd you get it?
Nashville.
How'd you get enough gasoline to travel that far during the war?
Well, he had a job then. In California.
Wasn't gas rationed?
Uh-uh.
No.
Not then.
No, see, he drew compensation from this till they made a settlement with him over his broken back in the oil fields. And we bought a new car. And then when we went to California, we still had a car, and went to California in the car. And I managed a grocery store. He worked in the plywood plant, and my daughter went to high school. See, she wasn't just in 8th grade when we went out there. She finished high school, and then she worked. First job, I guess, was bookkeeping, and we took her to San Jose to college, and she didn't like it, and we
Stayed
didn't.
one night.
And so we didn't make her stay.
Yeah.
She was just 16.
Mhm.
And
Did either of you do any work for the war effort in World War II?
I didn't. I don't know what she done.
When did you come back to
Too busy trying to
Oklahoma?
survive.
In when did we? 69.
How come you came back?
Well, my husband had 2 heart attacks in California. The doctor took him off the job. I was working for the state of California for Governor Ronald Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether
That's
you're
what she
Republican or Democrat. No, when I first started working for the state, see, we moved this logging town to Sacramento, and I worked for the state. First, I worked in income tax place, 1 year, and then I went to driver's license in the motor vehicle department. And then I took another test and went to what they call central control. All the work in California come into this. And I was still working when I quit and come back to Oklahoma.
What were you two doing when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
Do what?
What were you doing when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
Oh, we was at home. I remember Bill went to town to get a paper, and he come back talking about it. We lived in that little 2-room house at that time, over that Papa's.
That was in 41, huh?
December 41.
Uh-huh. My husband was in California, and Mavis and I was at home at Christie.
Mine was interested. He is a veteran of World War One. He was really interested in the war, but he was old already then.
I have lots of Japanese lady friends and Chinese. But one time, this Japanese lady in California, Sacramento, talking about how badly they were treated, when they moved them back from the coast. And we didn't really get into an argument. We're still friends. I still hear from her, get letters from her. But she's talking about, I told her, I said, your people was treated good. I said, they moved them back from the coast, and they housed them different places. And I said, when my people was moved from the state of Georgia and North Carolina and all through there, I said they didn't have no place, no house to stay in every night, and so on and so forth. And we got into big arguments, but we were still friends.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was working in Sacramento, a Chinese lady sat right in front of me, and a Japanese lady sat behind me. I've got lots of good Mexican friends, Japanese and Chinese,
I worked for the federal government.
everything.
You did? Where
We
at?
had a government loan, and we had to work to pay it off.
Any questions you want to ask?
No,
Is
I
it-
worked.
is it
come back-
getting
we did
dark?
labor. During the Depression, after we left Osage County and come back here, we just worked. I worked in the fields picking berries and picking green beans. And one year I went to Colorado and cut broom corn with the men.
When was this?
Pardon?
When was this?
About 1948, I guess. And my husband was old. He was old when he was 40 years old when we married, and he was near the 90 when he
Pardon?
died.
We're in Colorado.
You
It's,
want to see that?
close to Walls.
Is there
You mean
more?
that?
You know,
Is
just
there
over
more?
from,
What's that?
Huh?
What's the name of
Is
that?
there more here?
Campo.
No, that's not.
And they contacted Bill and one of his friends and their boy, and they contacted, and I cut with them in the field.
You want that?
And they other
Okay.
was women was cooking. Well, I did cook afterwards, but I just when Bill went, I went. We
Okay.
worked together. He worked in the field. I went.
If you can read
I
it,
didn't know
do
we
it.
found that kind of stuff. But we had a government loan. We lived on a government farm still. Well, we had to pay our loan off, so we had to work, and it wasn't very much. You got about 2 cents a pound for picking beans, and 2 cents a quart for picking berries.
Mm-hmm.
And every 2 cents it added up, make $1 after a while. So we worked together.
What's your favorite childhood memory?
I don't think I have any.
Besides getting your sister in trouble.
There's too many. She'd have a hard time picking them out.
What's your favorite childhood memory?
I think going home after having to stay away from home before we had the school at Christie, we had to go from home up here and stay at Grandpa's, and it was just Grandma and Grandpa and an old maid aunt there, and it was a lonesome place for us. And we'd cry a week before they took us down there and leave us. And Mom said she cried, but we didn't know she cried. But anyhow, and then get to come home. And when we got to come home, we get to come home at Christmas, and then when school was out for next spring, 2 times during that 9 months. So we had to stay right there. And that was the happiest time I could remember, getting to come home to see the folks.
Now your grandfather lived at Christie, and you lived here by.
The same cup, you know.
I remember when they did that asylum, you didn't that for us. It was past year. When you
Now there was a picnic every year
every year, July.
here at Westville.
Old Settlers Picnic. They call it picnic again, but it's just a rodeo now, isn't it? That's about all there is to it now. But that was a big deal then. They had just a carnival, you know, and everything. And they had a little rodeo out there, Woods boys did. Had a balloon to go up. That was a thrilling time to see the man go up in the balloon, you know.
Did you ever know anyone besides your grandparents that came over the Trail of Tears? You ever talked to anyone?
No, not really. I can't think of anybody right now. I just remember all their stories.
Just Sally Walker's all I know. I didn't know her, but I mean no other.
Now Sally Walker that's one that Mavis calls her ancestral grandmother.
Yeah.
Okay, why does she call her ancestral grandmother?
I don't know.
Just because that's about as far back as she can go. The family talked about, I guess,
Yeah.
because that's as far back as they ever went to talk about, and they didn't talk about anybody back at that.
There's one story I heard about a Cherokee woman that saved a battle, the Cherokees in a battle.
That was Nancy Ward, was it?
Was it?
Yes.
He knows all about that.
Uh-huh.
He knows more about all that stuff than we do, because he's done research all these years.
Tell me about Nancy Ward.
I want to know what they know about Nancy.
Oh,
Ward.
tell me about Nancy Ward. What you
I
all know.
really don't.
We don't know.
She loaded the gun and shot it. I remember that. I don't know. I'd have to read.
Is it
and
basically the same story like Molly Pitcher? In the Revolution, when her
so.
husband
It
was
is
killed, she
little
took
bit-
over his
A little
gun.
bit on that. On
yeah, something
What
similar.
What battle was it in?
I don't know.
Jack, when was it?
The
We
fight
don't-
with the Creeks, 1760.
Okay. Did the women follow the men in the battle? I mean, did they go
Sometimes.
with them?
These young heads can remember all that now. Even if we had read it, we've forgotten
We're
that.
too old to forget. Speaking of childhood memories, what stands out in my mind when she used to preach, we was kids, great big, and we went to church at Green. You know, parents would take us. We're little, so.
And Nick Snip preached in Cherokee. Real loud.
Next day. And so Papa had cleared a place for a
Well,
calf
cut
lot.
trees, there was just stumps, a lot of stumps around there.
Lots of stumps, cut them off about so high. And she was the preacher. She'd get on the stump, and she preached in Cherokee. And I was the congregation. I'd sit on one stump back here with a songbook, and she'd preach a while, and she'd come down, you know. And then I'd stand up.
Tell them what I said.
You tell them.
No, you're telling the story.
Said skating on Nella, gas on. What
You know,
is that,
gas
Jack?
on, you
They
know,
ever
they say-
get you?
Do you ever hear them use that word, garçon? Gerson something. That's what Nick Snip would say it. I might not say it right. That's the reason I'm always afraid to try to say it Cherokee. But he'd talk soft, you know. He'd say, Gerson, Gerson.
Yes, I've heard it.
Gerson, hey.
And every once in a while she'd come down, you know, and I'd stand up and sing.
She had a songbook. She'd sing a song or two.
Before our youngest sister was born, and that I was about 6, I guess, and you was
7,
about 8.
About 8
or 9 or something like that.
I was Cherokee.
You have
We
any-
had good time.
What kind of songs did you sing as kids?
Church songs.
Just hymns, about all we knew. Of course, after we started school, we learned Dixie and Marching Through Georgia and that kind of song. Every night when we got over to Grandpa's after school, they never did burn a light. Set a light a lamp at night. They always, in the fall, they'd have their man. He had a man work for him, haul in pine knots, pile them in the corner.
And
so,
had a fireplace 4 feet long.
And so they'd
We
put one of these
studied
pine
in
knots in and
firelight.
blaze up. That's the way we had to study, by that light. And then they had Mama she wove carpets, and she'd woven a carpet for them. They had wall-to-wall carpet. And in the fall, they'd put straw under that, you know, for a pad. And oh, it was real soft and good, you know. So we'd lay on the floor in front of the fireplace to study our lessons. Then Grandpa would see, he was a Civil War veteran, and he'd have us sing Georgia and Dixie and all those old songs, you know. And we'd just perform every night for Grandpa, because he had to hear that every night. And then we'd study our lesson by this firelight. And then the only time they'd light a lamp would be in the morning. They got up at 6 o'clock in the morning the year round, summer and winter, be way before daylight, you know, in the winter. And our aunt would get the lamp and light the lamp and take it to the kitchen. Didn't have it in there, and take it in the kitchen, cook breakfast and have breakfast ready. And we ate breakfast by a lamplight. And in summer, they didn't light a lamp when we went to bed. We'd get ready for bed, get our beds ready and everything, to then sit on the porch out there and hear them tell these scary stories, witches stories. So we got so scared we'd be afraid to move. Then we'd have to wash if we went barefoot, we'd have to wash our feet, you know, and sit around there till our feet got dry.
What kind of stories did he tell? Do you remember any?
I remember one time Emma told about somebody was witched somebody, and so they was troubling them. So I can't remember how they troubled them anyway. So every night there'd be a deer come in their yard, and these people, they were all spooky, and they'd shoot that deer, but it'd just jump the fence and leave. And every time they'd come, they'd shoot it, but it got away, and they was telling about it. So somebody said, well, you run a silver bullet. They run their own bullets, you know, made their own bullet. You run a silver bullet, and said you'll find out who it is. So they did. They run a silver bullet, put it in their gun. So the next time the deer come in the night, they shot it with this bullet. Well, it left, but said the next day one of their neighbors was sick. So somebody told them to go over there, that somebody's sick, and said that they went over there and set up with this person, and said that what was wrong with him, said he had a bullet hole in him somewhere, and had green leaves stuffed in this bullet hole, and all that. That's where he'd shot with the silver bullet, and so had green leaves stuffed in that hole, and they found out who it was trying to conjure him. That's the story. And that our cousins, 2 boys heard that, and their cousin said, do you believe what Aunt Emma told us about that bullet? Well, said, I don't think Aunt Emma lied, but said, I sure don't believe that.
Maybe it's a story my daddy used to tell her, and every time we'd go down there in the evening, while she'd have him tell that about the cat, nobody, there's a haunted house, you know, and there's a porch swing on the porch of my parents, and they'd be sitting out there, and Papa would tell that same story if she liked it. She's just a great big kid, and so the story was there's a haunted house, and some man said he wasn't afraid, he'd go stay all night there, you know. So he built up a big fire in the fireplace, and while he was sitting there before the fire at night, this black cat come in and sat down by it. Said, This there's two here tonight, huh? And the cat said to the man, and he said, yes, but you're going to be by yourself pretty soon. So said he jumped up and run out the door and raced down the road. And when he stopped, out of breath, why, the cat was right by him. And so the cat looked up at him and said, we sure had a race, didn't we?
You didn't say it like he told it.
No, I left out the cuss word. And every time we'd go, she'd say, Grandpa, tell me about the cat. He'd tell it again, Oh, mercy.
Well, what else you want to tell me?
Nothing. We've wasted enough film already. Didn't tell you anything after all.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, mercy.
Oh, you told me what your favorite chore was. What was the chore you hated most?
Washing dishes.
Washing dishes. That was it.
That wasn't really mine. I don't know what mine was, but
I
never
hated to
did care
wash dishes,
to wash
and
dishes.
still do.
How come?
I just don't like to wash dishes. I'll do anything else, but I do wash them. I'm the only one to wash them.
Had to fix it.
I can't afford to throw them away or use paper plates all the time. Burn them up. I have to watch them. I'm by myself.
I think carrying in wood must have been my worst one. We had to carry in wood every evening because they cooked with wood, you know. We'd have
Oh,
to cook
I'll
wood.
tell you a story about on the South. One time, when we lived out here, I was a great big kid, 6, 7 years old, before our young sister was born. And every night, I don't guess every night, but seemed like to me every night, we'd have fritters, we called them fritters.
It was pancakes. Mom made
Pancakes
for
and
supper.
molasses,
Made
sorghum
sorghum.
molasses and butter. We had cows, and we'd have that at night. And the stove sat across the corner of the room, and the door come in from the living room in here, and the eating table was here. So I'd seen Mama stirring this in a big bowl and saw her doing like this, mixing it, So one day one evening I come out of the living room, and here I thought I'd stir that a little bit. I wasn't tall enough, I stirred, and Mother was over there at the stove. She had her back to me, and she didn't see me, didn't know I was in there. And when I flopped some out about that much, and I moved the bowl around and to hide it from I got smart. I went out and carried in, we always called it stove wood. Did your folks?
Yes.
Cook wood, cooking and cook stove. So when I brought a big load of wood in and put it in the wood box, why, Mama was just boxing her around, just slapping her. And she kept saying, Mama, I told you I didn't do it. And she said, well, who did? You're the only one in here.
She whipped me because she thought I was telling a story, And Mama didn't know any different until after we was grown and married. And
Well,
then
I
she
was just
owned
a
up to it.
singing big.
I told Mama, I said, see, no wonder I haven't got good sense. I got beat around
Back
or
and
something.
got
didn't do it.
another armload, and she's just boxing her around.
She'll do that yet today. She'd make it look like I did something. And she'd
No, I
be
don't
guilty.
anymore. I don't anymore. But she was always tattletale. She'd say, I'm going to tell Mama on you every time I
I
turned
carried the
around.
blame for everything she ever did, I think.
Oh, mercy.
Oh.
Well, have we told enough stories?
Oh, let me see. We've covered the
Run
trail
out
of
of
tears.
paper and tape and everything else.
They are descended from Nancy Ward. You mentioned Nancy Ward earlier.
Yeah.
Did you know that?
You are descended from Nancy Ward. How?
We don't know now. We didn't know that till later years. folks didn't remember. My dad didn't know much about Honor the Star Bunch. That's what he's so proud of.
Oh, I was going to ask about Pawhuska. What the town looked like first time you went there.
Always really busy, thriving. Osage just had money to sort the birds at that time. And they were, every one in the family, kids and all, had a car. And they were just on the streets day and night, just making the circle up and down the
Just
streets.
right up and down Main Street.
And
turn
feasts
around down
every
there.
day. I've set the table for 200 people lots of times. They had feasts, you know, and they had that Native American church, you know, their Peyote church. I've helped with that, and I've had to help fix the Peyote, and they found ghosts away from me, all the spirits, before I could touch the stuff. Take it in the house, and we had to take it in early in the morning. They'd sing all night, you know, and drink tea and eat Peyote, and then early in the morning, the chief's daughter and I would take candy and cookies and stuff in there to them. The drum would stop and the singing would stop. Then when it got morning, we'd take it in there. But we had to wait till the drum got a certain place before we got to the door, and there was a fireman sitting at the door and let us in. We had carried this stuff in a war blanket, you know, like the Western tribes. Carried this stuff, and the chief was the head man. Road man, they called him. They had this concrete cut out and fixed in the shape of an arrow, and you had a place for an arrow of a thing. They called it a staff, hung up there with all kind of feathers and doings on it, and then they had some. I think it's mixed with the Catholics. The Catholics, their religion is because they had a rosary here, and they'd have one little peyote right on top of this rosary. And I couldn't see it, but I didn't know it was there. And it's the first time I ever went. Bill would go in with him just to be passing the time with, and he sang all night. He liked that Indian singing, you know, and one drummer would go drum for so many songs all the way around. And so we took this in, and we got in there. I told Mary, I said, now you go first. I know they'll throw me out if I do something wrong. So she said, well, you just follow me and do what I do. So she went up there with her stuff and set it down to the old man. Well, he prayed for her and ended and fanned all the spirits off of her, you know, and she went on around. When I got to it, well, I'd done the same thing, you know, and I didn't touch all the things, and Mrs. Lookout, she kept saying, touch that medicine, touch that medicine. I looked, I didn't see any medicine, but finally I touched everything that was there, and I guess I finally touched that peyote. That's what she wanted me to touch. So he fanned the spirits away from me, and I went on around and sat down. The religious part was all, but they just went telling crazy stories and everything else and having a big time. Then they'd come out, and they were cooking up there, and I'd help set the tables on the ground, take an oilcloth table and spread it, and always put table plates and bowls on. And then we'd put all that food on, and all of them would come there and eat, all they could hold, tie big bowls of food, take home with them. And some of them would bring buckets and kettles that big, you know. If there was a new kettle sitting there with stuff, they'd buy a lot of new stuff. Well, before anybody ever started eating, well, some of these old ladies, they were all sitting on the ground. They'd bring big tea towels, and they'd just tie this kettle up and set it over here. And, well, the time they all got taken what they wanted, well, they had to go get some more and put it on the table to eat, you know. And they'd pray so long. That's why before they'd get it while they're praying. Somebody would stand up there and talk, just pray for a long time. And by the time he got through praying, then the food was about all gone, you know. Take it out. And I just get so mad at them because I thought they were so greedy. But they expected them to take it. But now somebody said some of them just raised their families on what they took from the feast. Then after they got through, and some of them would go home. They all had drivers. Some of them would go home, and some of them would just go out there in the shade and spread out the place and lay down and just sleep the rest of the day. Just dead to the world from that purity, you know. And so I learned a lot about that part of it. You know, Mrs. Lookout was real good to tell me. And she said, you know, write that up sometime. And because I was his secretary, I had to write his business letters to Washington. Can you imagine that? I had to write his letters, and he's always tipping me for things. But she'd tell me stories, tell them in English about their people. I know more about as much about the Osage as I do the Cherokees. It's about, I guess. But anyhow, she'd tell me. She said, someday, said, you're not right. She said, I'll tell it, and you can write it. But we never did. But it would have been interesting, the things that I remember yet today about how they lived. And they were wilder. See, went back further than the Cherokees. We lived like white people way back there. But these didn't. They followed
What are
the
some of the
buffalo.
stories she told you about the Osage?
Pardon?
What are some of the stories she told you about the Osage?
Oh, mercy. She told about in the fall when they'd start to follow the buffalo, getting ready for winter, the old ladies and the old men would stay at home and keep the children, and the younger people would go and they'd take the young boys to herd the ponies that they took along, and they'd go follow the buffalo, and then they'd kill the meat and bring it in, and the women skinned and took care of the hides and took care of the meat and took all that tallow and rendered it, and then said when they got the tallow rendered, they'd dig a hole. They always had little axes. They'd cut holes in the dirt, in the ground, so big. Then they'd take this hide and put it in there and put the fur side out and put it in there. And pour this melted tallow in this thing, and when it got hard, then they'd bundle it up. And then the meat, they'd do this, they'd slice it. They could take a piece of meat that big and make a piece longer than this table, just as thin as paper. It was really good the way they could do it. They were experts. And they'd take all of that and they'd dry it. And some of us had barbecue, but they'd usually dry it and then tie it up in bundles. And then when they got enough for the winter, they'd start home. They'd had these travois, whatever they call the teepee poles, they'd drag along, and they'd tie these bundles and put all this stuff that they had, the meat and tallow and stuff, and tie it on these things and take it home for the winter. And the old folks were camped, in teepees.
Some of them Plains Indians eat raw meat. Eat the meat raw, huh?
Yeah, Lookout's daughter married a Sioux, and we visited the Sioux one summer, and they were wild. His mother's sister and her husband, their names was the White Bull, and they was real wild ones. They had paint all over them, and they wore moccasins, and she had a scabbard on the side with a butcher knife in it, or them kind of knives and all, and they couldn't talk. Some of the words were the same of the Osages and the Sioux, and the rest of them they talked with sign language. Them two old men that sat in the shade and just so quiet, and then they'd laugh. That's the only noise you'd hear when they'd laugh about the stories they're telling. This old woman, she sliced, Mrs. Lookout had bought a quarter of beef for this old woman. Cut it and sliced it, and they hung it up over the fire to dry and barbecued it. And so when she got through with this great big, the joint would be that big, great big old bone, She laid beside the fire there, and so they spread the table on the ground. When they got ready to eat, everybody sat around to eat. So this old lady, all at once, she walked real quick, fast. She got up, went to the fire, got that bone, broke it in two, and went back and sat down at the table. And she got a little green stick, She had this bone. This is going to make you sick. She'd put that stick in there and stir that marrow in that bone. And maybe she'd put a little salt on it. She'd right at the table where they all eat, and then she'd cut off slice off of this raw meat that was still on the bone and eat it raw. Never touched the fire. I was just laying close to the fire where they cut it. And they read, and Mrs. Lookout called me, and she said, "Al, when they come in, you want to see a real wild Indian, come in and look at this." I don't know if the old woman knows what she's saying or not, but anyhow, they really did. And they was really wild. Some of those were still already old.
What was Mrs. Lookout like? What kind of person was she?
She was a likable person, but a lot of the Osages didn't like her. They thought she was too, I don't know if she's
strict.
Yes.
Too bossy.
Bossy, I guess. They're kind of overbearing. They didn't like that. But she'd tell things. Old man couldn't talk English very well, and he'd tell her what he wanted about his tribe, his council and all, and the people come for get information from him, help from him all the time, come to the home, and so and the white people that was trying to deal with Osages, they'd come to the house, Well, Mr. Lookout would tell Mrs. Lookout, and then she'd tell them in English because she could speak good English. And so then the Osages were always mad because they had a pull, I don't know if you'd say a pull at the agency, but anyhow they listened to him, because he was very in telling the
Well,
old
he
man.
was the chief.
And so, but the others, I think they were
looked at him.
envious more or less of them, and they were well-to-do and had their money good. I guess you'd call it good. They wasted it, of course, like the rest of them, but still, they talked and they always say, well, the old lady's the chief. And one time she told them, she said, now I'm telling you this. She's talking English. She said, I'm going to tell you this. I said, this is his words. Said, he's the one who said that, and he told me to say that to you. And so she just told them flat why she was saying that. Said that she was getting the blame for all this information. And she said they thought his real good. They didn't know what he's telling her, you know. But he was fair in his judgment. Well, she was too, but she stood her ground and done her part more than he did. But he was very good.
What was some of the major things, I guess the major happenings while you were his secretary?
Oh, I don't know. Now, I wasn't his real secretary. He had a secretary at the agency,
Mhm.
but I would write letters just on just some other things that come up that they'd write, and he'd have me to answer the letter. And I don't even remember what they were. It'd go back to Washington. It was something, but it was a letter that I could answer because I wasn't that smart, you know, to be a real secretary to him. But I did a lot of his writing. But he had a secretary at the agency that took care of his business and all that thing.
How come you started working for him? How'd you get,
I married Bill, and Bill was working there.
and he was his driver?
He was his driver, and so they had a purity meeting the day that we were going to get married on Saturday. This is kind of silly. On Saturday, and of course Bill was 40 years old already, and he had been married before. But anyway, we were going to get married. Well, look, I had to have a meeting, and Bill made 40 trips to town and back. They lived 7 miles out that day, and just go get this and go get that and do this. So they kept him busy all day. They knew we were going to get married, though. The old man gave him some money. I forgot how much for a wedding present. And their son had a Lincoln Roadster, old fancy yellow Lincoln Roadster. Oh, as long as over there, you know. He said, "Willie, you can use my car. Bill doesn't have a car." So, well, anyway, they kept Bill busy till late in the evening. And so I was at Hominy. And so finally, about 5 o'clock, Bill called me. He said, "I'll be there in about 30 minutes. So he did. He came down in that Lincoln Roadster, you know, and then we went back. It was near dark then, just about. We went back through Pawhuska to Bartlesville, and on the way I found out he didn't even have his license, and it was Saturday. And I was so mad at him, and I said, "Well, you can't get a license today." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'll get it somehow." I said, "If you don't, you're going to take me back to Hominy." He said, "Well, now, we could just stay over here and then get him the next day, or Monday, I guess he thought. I don't know what he was thinking anyway." And I said, "No, you won't." I said, "You'll take me back to Hominy." I was 27 years old. So, well, we got to Bartlesville, and he didn't know where the courthouse is closed, but he went to the police station, I believe, and asked about the court clerk. Is that where you get your license, is court clerk? Anyhow, so they told where he lived. So we went up to their house, and they got there. His father said, "No," said, "he just left with his girlfriend going to school." Told us how he was dressed and about how far down he'd be. We went back, overtook him. Stopped the first couple we saw, you know. Bill asked him, and he said, yeah, I'll go get them for you." Well, they got in the car with us, and we went to the courthouse, and he let up and went in and got Bill's license, and I don't know, I said, Bill might have, I forgot now, Bill might have told a story on my license. I don't know what he told, my age, what or what, but anyhow, they got the license, and the boy says that.
Years of age, though, huh?
Yeah, so that he might have told him I was 42. But anyhow, said, "You got anybody to marry you?" He said, "No." So, well, my dad's a justice of the peace. Said, we go up there if you want to. And Bill said, "Okay." So, yeah, we went back up to his dad's. We went in justice of peace and got married in his house that night. But we stayed in Bartlesville that night. And the next day we went to Tulsa, but there's a exhibition baseball game in April, you know. And I believe the St. Louis Cardinals, and I don't remember who those was playing. I guess they was playing, and that name sticks with me.
Mm.
And we went to a baseball game. Bill used to play professional baseball, and he was wrapped up with baseball and football too. But anyhow, we went back to the ball game, and he had a sister and a brother living in Tulsa. So after the game was over, then we went. He went and bought cake and ice cream, took it down to his sister, had a little party down there. Then we went back to Pawhuska.
We
that
didn't
night.
have any cake and ice cream.
Oh, you are not eloped. But I was mad at Bill because I said, if
Well,
you
you
don't
did
get the
too.
license tonight, I
I
said,
don't
you will
care
take
if
me
you
back to
asked
Harmony.
to. You did too. You never told nobody.
Well, I didn't have to. I was of age.
I
But
was too.
I didn't tell my folks. They lived in town, and
I
I really,
was too.
truly intended to go by and tell them that I was going. Of course, they knew I was going to Bill. But my
I
heart
was
failed me
about
at the
to
last
tell
minute
my
because
folks.
our youngest sister had been. She come and stayed all one night with me the night before. She knew it. And she and the lady I was staying with, they cried all day because I was going to get married. And so Eddie tried to talk me out of it. And so when Bill, they had quit crying, and when Bill got there and come to the door, she went to the door and she said, Bill, are you going to take her? And he said, yep, come after her. So, see,
Nobody
you got
didn't
that
cry.
shut off, I hope.
Nobody didn't cry when I got married. They was glad to get rid of me.
It's
rolling.
oh, it's not, it is. Oh, mercy. You better erase that one. But, I lay in the bed in the nighttime and think about the funny things that we went through. We had a happy life, but we had a hard life. We was all through the Depression, and we worked together and went here and there and all, and did things, had the hardships together. And then I get looking back over now and think about it, and I'll just laugh out loud. It was sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, it's a good thing there's nobody passes my house. I'd think I was daddy. It was fun. But we had an old, let's go.
Huh?
We had that old truck. We used to come down after we quit Lookhouse, and we'd come down to Papa's and take us all day long to come from Pawhuska down here. And that old big old Ford truck didn't have a jack, didn't have a spare tire. He'd have to patch them, a cold patch. Well, sometimes we'd have a flat, had a block of wood in there, and now this is truth, but it's silly.
But
It's
that's
funny.
not like Clara
Yeah.
come from California, though.
And he'd take that pole and the block of wood and jack it, and I'd sit on a pole. He takes the tire off, and patch it. And I was afraid somebody'd come by and know who I was, and I'd put my back to the highway, and I'd get me a book and read while he's changing the tire and fixing it, Now that's really true things. Now that's how people did, and now that these young people, they don't know what that, and you folks don't know what that's like nowadays. And a lot of the younger ones, they think you're just making that up to make a story. But, oh, so many things.
He's run out of tape. We're going to have to go.
Had you got another one? No. We're just killing his time. He don't
Well,
care what
thank
happens.
you.
You was talking about peyote deal. One time, the Indians, the Osages, wouldn't let anybody else go in the roundhouse with them for church.
Mhm.
And one time there was a white boy working for this Osage family, and they let him go in. And when he come out the next morning, why, some of the outsiders asked him what he's like. And
Go into that church because he's reckless, and just drinking. And she said, you ought to straighten up now. And
I
go
didn't
in
tell you
church
much.
with it." But he said, if that's all God's going to show him, he wasn't going
I didn't
anymore.
tell you about my
The
life.
greyhounds
but,
running all over him.
we better go home. It's dark. I'm driving.
I need.
I don't know which one
Huh?
goes where. Do you, Jack?
No, we'll fake it.
I
What?
need.
We'll pretend we.
Pardon?
I need you to sign that. So we
What
can-
is it? I usually don't sign anything unless I read it. Oh, you not gonna.
Oh, we don't need to worry about that side.
Where?
Right there.
Used over there.
Putting my thumb on. I was first one to Osage County, and my parents and May and all of them followed me out there. I thought my parents didn't like my husband, but they got any good humor pretty soon.
Well, that's good.
May, you have to sign your life away here.
Put my thumb mark on.
Yeah. I've got to get my coat.
I don't know if after all that tale whether I can write or not.
Well, we traveled with two Osage families, my husband and I, and went to Canada. We was gone 7 weeks one time to a day, and cooked out and everything. Went to the Black Hills in South Dakota.
Now leave out that worst part. Don't put all that we've said in there. We just got wound up.
What part's that?
All that worst that we said, just say what you just have to have.
I didn't hear any worst
I
part.
didn't either.
Hey, and we went to a dance in Canada, across the line. We was in Browning, Montana, and danced. Everybody, tourists, you know. You want to call it dancing.
Do you
Pardon?
do you do the Indian dance? No.
My daughter does sometimes. Mavis does. I have stomp danced with the Cherokees, but not anymore. I've got arthritis in my knees and I can't.
Do you do any basket weaving like Mavis does?
I was the one that really taught her, actually. Yeah,
Where'd you learn?
from, we had a little class here in town, and lady.
Who was it, John Kester? Who was come from California over here?
Virginia Martin.
Is that the lady that taught
Uh-huh.
basket weaving? Where's she from?
Stillwell.
Stillwell. She a Cherokee?
But it was,
Yeah.
Annie, it was started though from the telephone office over there, this one.
Oh, yes. First,
shop.
we went to Tahlequah, really, and then we had our basket place, made baskets and sold them.
Mm-hmm.
And go to arts and crafts fairs and stuff like that.
How come they started the basket weaving?
Well, make money.
Well, really, what I'm saying is then just learn to make baskets. I'm just used to
Wasn't that, wasn't she a pork killer for
Of
Jane?
course, I handled the money, you know, that was the main part. We was sick.
Can you believe that?
We went to Fort Smith and different places, you know.
We had to do it. I just make one and wouldn't do it.
Jack, what is this chair?
First thing, we would be